You're listening to the No Bullshit Vegan Podcast, episode 173. Today, computational scientist and ultramarathoner Jeyashree Krishnan speaks with me about why critical thinking is important in choosing one's diet, how to make sense of conflicting diet information online, and why lifestyle and diet choices are not binary.
Welcome to the No Bullshit Vegan Podcast, myth-busting and evidence-based advice to help you kick butt with your health and fitness on a vegan diet. Here's your host, Karina Inkster.
Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Karina, your go-to no BS vegan fitness and nutrition coach. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you're a new listener or you've been tuning in for a while but you haven't yet downloaded the free No BS Vegan ebook, make sure you go to nobullshitvegan.com/ebook and get your copy now. It includes advice from yours truly on fueling strength training with plants, as well as insight from 4 experts that have been featured on the podcast, including Robert Cheek, one of the founders of Vegan Bodybuilding. And spoiler, by the way, he will be back on the podcast very soon. Find out how much protein you really need, which 5 nutrition mistakes to avoid, why soy is a health-promoting food and should not be avoided, 6 reasons a 100% plant-based diet may enhance strength training results and recovery, and more. Download your free copy at nobullshitvegan.com/ebook. My guest today is a computational scientist and data science consultant with a personal passion for ultramarathons and plant-based cooking. Jeyashree Krishnan lives in Germany and uses her knack for simplifying complex data to solve problems and help others understand intricate concepts. Her drive stems from a deep-seated curiosity and a love for learning. Coming from India and having pursued her master's and PhD in Germany, Jeyashree brings a diverse range of experiences and insights to her work and daily life. She spends much of her free time diving into books and research papers, always eager to question and critically think about the world around her. Beyond her academic and professional pursuits, Jeyashree cherishes the challenges of ultramarathons, testing her limits with each race. In the kitchen, she loves to experiment with various cuisines, with a special fondness for spicy dishes. Cooking plant-based meals is more than just a hobby for her. It's a way to explore creative, healthy eating. Jeyashree's favorite vegan meal is a sweet potato boat, which is one of many things we talk about in our conversation. Here goes. Hi, Jeyashree. Thanks so much for speaking with me today and coming on the show.
Thanks, Karina. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
I love the internet sometimes. We met on LinkedIn and I saw your profile and I was like, this is an interesting human and she needs to be on the show.
Well, I'm really humbled and happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Karina.
Of course, of course. So one question I have for you right off the bat is, in your guest intake form, you put that your favorite vegan meal is a sweet potato boat, which I need to know about. Is this where you bake a sweet potato and you cut it in half and then you put a whole bunch of toppings on it? Like, what's the deal?
Precisely. Yeah, I mean, it's my personal favorite because there aren't a lot of meals that taste great and are absolutely healthy. And this one ticks both. And it also is kind of a European, let's say, Middle East Asian fusion. It's somewhere from near Greece or Italy. I have to look it up. And I like it because exactly like you said, you just bake the sweet potato, cut them into half, and then you bake some chickpeas as well, put some spices on it, and then chop some vegetables and then put it on top. And then it's like a full meal. You can have like 2 sweet potatoes if you're really really hungry, and you're absolutely happy in the end. You can also add hummus. I think it's a good add for the whole dish, and it's kind of my weekend cheat, if I could call it that way.
Well, not even. It's more like a treat. It's delicious.
Exactly.
That's very cool. And you could probably batch cook them too, at least the sweet potato part, right? You could bake a whole bunch of them if you wanted to, and then you have like 3 or 4 days worth. Just thinking ahead because I want to try it this weekend.
Precisely. Yeah, you could batch cook them. That's also another, like now I think about it, it's a good add-on to have, right? You don't have to redo it every day. And yeah, also the veggies, maybe the veggies you might have to chop them fresh, but it's a good meal that you can make once in 3 days or something and just eat. Yeah.
Totally. Okay, now I'm hungry. Thanks for that.
I can bring you some sweet potato boats.
Oh, that would be amazing. Can you just send them over from Germany?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just so our listeners know, Jeyashree is originally from India, but is living in Germany currently. So we're transversing what is it, a 9-hour difference? Something like this?
I would assume so.
It's the evening for you and it's afternoon for me.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's very cool. Well, okay, so tell our listeners a little bit about what you do, because we're going to talk about some stuff that isn't officially your career, like ultramarathon and veganism and things that you're very passionate about. But what you do as a JOB is quite different. It's computational science. You're a data scientist, consultant. Tell our listeners a little bit about what this entails and what you do in your work.
Yeah, sure. My career trajectory has been in the area of simulations and machine learning. And once I finished my graduation in that, I joined a company here in Germany. There's a consulting segment where we solve like digital transformation problems or data science problems in our everyday work. So you could imagine this is some kind of a consulting engagement with different sets of people within and outside the company that have a certain set of let's say challenges or business problems associated to data science in general. So that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years. Before that, as I mentioned, I did my PhD in computational science, which is more the kind of the, let's say, the other side of the coin, if you could put it that way, because right now I work on short projects very quickly. Previously it was like one very long project that was like forever. So that's a little bit about me professionally. So my everyday life is like coding and then meetings and then chatting with people and implementing stuff and so on and so forth. And of course, as you rightly mentioned, Karina, I like to run as well. I've run a few marathons and ultra marathons, and that keeps me going. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, thank you for that. What is fueling all of the training that you do? You're plant based yourself, of course. So, like, what is it about running? What is it about ultramarathon that keeps you going, that keeps you interested?
Yeah, that's a great question. So originally, when I started, I didn't have like a big scheme or a plan in mind. I just started running because, hey, I want to do sports, I want to stay fit, and so on and so forth. It started off with a 5K, and then it went to 10, and then the madness increased, and it went to half marathon, and then
The madness. Okay, I agree with that.
exactly. I mean, some people really thought it was mad, and then I started like introspecting why I really want to scale and do that. And that's when I kind of realized that, like if you actually think about it, like life is like a marathon, or a marathon is like life. Like in life, you typically have like ups and downs and big challenges, small challenges, and you, whatever happens, you need to wake up next day, get out there, get doing things. Of course there'll be low days, but you need to push yourself to be like, you know what, this is going to get better, I'm going to get better, I'm going to push myself, and so on. And I think marathon is kind of like a trailer to this big movie called life. Like for me, like in marathon or ultra marathons, typically at 30-40 kilometers, you're like, what, I mean, why am I doing this to myself? This is like really hard. You really want to give up. Like it's like a brain game. Like your body is not giving up, actually you can push it, but your brain wants to give up. But then this thing of like the resilience that you build by just like pushing yourself, you know what, I'm not going to give up on my own. Of course, if for whatever other reasons I break my leg or whatever, I give up, that's something that is beyond my control. But just like trying to push myself in the marathon feels like I'm more prepared for the challenges in life. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. It's a metaphor for life itself. I love that. That's amazing.
Thanks, Karina. Yeah, that's what I tell myself. Yeah.
Of course, of course. So tell me about the plant-based side of things. So what brought you to this way of eating? Did you grow up with that? Is it a decision you made? How does that look for you?
It was certainly a decision I made because it's typically, let's say, I went plant based almost 10 years back. At that time, it was not, let's say, very trendy to switch to this.
Yeah, that's well before it was cool.
Exactly. Now vegan is the cool, and there's a lot of replacement products. I'm super happy for that. But at the time, it was a bit more challenging. The kind of transformation point came when more than 10, 12 years back, I watched this movie. What was it? An Inconvenient Truth, I think, by Al Gore.
Mm-hmm.
The movie kind of showed this whole concept of like climate change and how diet affects climate change and so on and so forth. And up until this point, most of these words are like, jargon for me. And I looked it up and I was like, what's this stuff? And why do people relate diet to like, weather conditions and things like this? And that's what got me thinking about why we are eating what we are eating. So, like, pretty much it's usually culture or tradition, acceptable. But at the end of the day, it's also a certain set of macronutrients, and it also influences the external environment. And beings. So once I started, that was around the time I was transitioning to research, so I could pull out some papers and read and try to, like, understand on my own certain things. And I started experimenting it, and that's how it started. And slowly, in the beginning, I was doing mix of everything. I was not like strictly vegan because I felt I had to try it out to understand. And then slowly I was able to kind of make it into a thing, and now I almost feel like it feels like almost irreversible. I feel like more energetic and more, up for things within this diet, and I feel like I'm doing something for the environment, at least not negative. Yeah.
Of course. Well, thanks for sharing that. I think, interestingly, a few different academic folks that I've spoken with have come to veganism from the research. Like they've been doing research themselves, outside of their career, or they are research scientists and they started looking into the connections between diet and environment and ethics and other humans on the planet. So it's interesting what brings folks to veganism and what is a catalyst, and in a lot of cases, especially for academic folks, it seems to be the research itself. And that's something that we can talk about too, because we're going to go into critical thinking and how that applies to our diets and decisions we make. But thank you for sharing. I appreciate that kind of background origin story of who
Yeah.
Jeyashree is as a plant-based person. Very cool.
Absolutely. Thanks, Karina. Yeah.
Of course. So why is critical thinking important in terms of diet and following through, being consistent, making decisions for ourselves? What does diet have to do with critical thinking?
That's an excellent question. Personally, at the end of the day, let's if we just drop the vegan agenda, plant-based stuff, all of it, let if even if we put all that aside, we are in some sense entitled to take care of ourselves at least. So at the end of the day, we need to be aware of like how much protein, how much carbohydrates, what is it that's going into my system and what is it that's coming out of my system, how healthy I am, and so on. So at least at that level, I think we all agree that we need to know the numbers. We need to think critically. Am I, eating too much of fat? Am I eating too much of carbohydrates? No fat bashing here, but just telling any macronutrients for that matter. So that's certainly one layer, because the area of like looking into the diet itself is now so established that we don't question it. But what somehow I feel we are all a little bit cognitive, we have cognitive dissonance about, is that like, from which source do we get all these macronutrients? This is what we are all debating about here. And at that level, we somehow just neglect it. We don't care. We say, hey, like, it doesn't matter which source it comes from as long as I'm getting my macronutrients. And I think that is where the critical thinking plays a big role. We already, to some extent, use critical thinking in our diet now. Most of us have a smartphone, we have some kind of a wellness app or something that tracks macronutrients. But what we don't really realize is the sources also matter as much as the macronutrients. And even more important, the sources that we consume also affect the environment, not just the animals, but also the bigger ecosystem, so to say. And that's where I feel it's important to exercise critical thinking wherever possible. Yeah.
Interesting. So, what sort of questions can we, as non-scientists, we as in me, ask ourselves when it comes to diet? What are some of the things that we can ask?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the idea of critical thinking does not require anyone to necessarily read papers or come from a scientific background. It's more a muscle that we just like develop just by doing stuff. I think just like when we have a question, it's now very common to go to Google or ChatGPT and ask, hey, or like, why is it like this, or what is that, and so on. The same way, if we were to question our, let's say, fixed mindset about certain aspects of the diet. For example, we know statistically like beef has the highest carbon footprint, but a lot of us consume beef. There could be 100% rationalization for that. Perhaps some people consume beef only once a week, but for someone who consumes beef every day, it's actually logically hard to motivate exactly why that is good for the bigger ecosystem. So there, I think where we need to like come out is that we need to think, hey, maybe I'm wrong. Let me go look up online exactly what's the effect of eating beef on an everyday basis, for example, and then be able to answer that and even correct that if possible. Even if you skip one meal of that and eat something else, it overall, adds up in the macro system. So these are the small questions, I think. No, let's say major questions about, I don't know, is this amino acid present in this? Like, that is probably not the biggest of questions that affects all of us, but more the general questions, and then taking them one level down compared to just a blog post on Google or something. You do a little bit more desktop research and convince yourself that what you're doing is the right thing for everyone.
Well put. I feel like a lot of people need to learn how to research, though. I mean, it took grad school for me to understand really how to do proper lit reviews and critique articles. I mean, I feel like not necessarily the peer-reviewed research side, but the critical thinking side, I think needs to be taught way earlier in the school system, because it basically isn't, at least here in Canada where I went to school, until grad school, doing your own thesis, creating your own or running your own study. That's the point where I learned how to look at someone else's research and how to look at how large the statistical effect was and all this stuff, which is fine. But it took that long to get to that point. And I feel like this could have been taught in high school at a simpler level, but at least a way that gets people thinking about the right questions. Because from being on social media and from having a guilty pleasure of poking trolls on Reddit and Facebook and stuff, I know that there's a lot of people out there who have convinced themselves that beef is the absolute best thing for the environment, and that, hey, everyone should be supporting animal agriculture because A, B, and C, it sequesters carbon and blah, blah, blah. They've convinced themselves of this, right? So what advice do you have for the general population to make sure that they're even asking the right question in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I completely agree with you. I think a lot of things could have been taught in school, and I don't know why we weren't taught that. And certainly, like, reconsidering your diet should be in the course, I think. But if someone
Hmm.
considers this opinion, that I'm throwing it out there. So, so coming to your point, Karina, I think there are three things that we can probably take out of this question of, like, how do you convince people, or let's put it like this: how can people convince themselves that what they're doing is best for them? I think the first thing is, like you mentioned, it's pretty cool to read Reddit or Quora or stuff like this, and they have really good answers. Particularly the experiential bit is very valuable, I think, when you are facing a particular situation or whatever. I think the subjective answers really help a lot, but where the question comes to me is, are they objective? So most of the time, that's not the place we would want to go to get objective answers. This is where it gets muddled. What we would, I think, recommend is that, can you go pick up a research paper which has the highest number of citations for that particular study and read it? But this obviously is time consuming. It's not a material that everyone would want to read, and it's too challenging, it's too boring, all accepted. So in that regard, what would make sense is, that's where the introspection really plays a big role. Sit down and think about all the ideologies that you really hold on to, and you're not able to find logical answers for it. Like, I want to eat beef because, I don't know, in my family we've already always eaten beef, and I really love eating beef because the taste is amazing. Now, that's not a objective answer, it's a subjective answer. So if you give only subjective answer, then you can, if you have the introspection mindset, then you can accept yourself, hey, I'm not able to convince myself, so let me go to an expert, for example like you, and ask, hey, what do you think about it? Now, in this, again, there is a decision tree. Maybe they will come to you, or maybe they will go to someone who propagates beef. This is where all gets confusing, actually. But point is, I think they should come to someone who propagates beef and someone who doesn't propagate beef. Hear both sides, ideally 10 of each if you can, and then make a decision. Now, this is again time consuming, but this is really the core of it. Like, if you can spend that time, I think it's your health, it's your life, it's the health of the environment, it's worth it. But there are really only two methods: papers and people. And you need to have diverse set of papers, or some kind of study that is not biased and not funded by certain agencies. Or you need to have people, and you need to have both kinds of people who give you two sides of the argument, and then you need to find, like, use your critical thinking to understand what's best for you and for the environment. But at the end of the day, I feel if someone doesn't want to be convinced, you cannot convince them. That's also true. So
Oh, I know that from experience.
yes, But we can give it a try all the time. Like I think all of us have at any given point in time in some kind of cognitive dissonance. We always hold two kinds of ideology that actually conflict with each other, and with respect to diet, certainly so. But the thing is, when we have it, I think we should address it if we can and try to take action if possible.
Okay, so let's review because there was a lot of info there. What are the three points that we can use to make sure that we're asking the right questions? So you mentioned people, you mentioned papers. That might have been from one of the points, though.
That's right. People, papers, and maybe self introspection, really. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, or the critical
Okay.
thinking, like just sit down and write, okay, I'm eating this because I don't know, like ABCD. I think it's good for environment, it's good for me, it's good for people around me. If it all of the buckets tick, then you have a at least to some extent a logical argument there. But if you write down reasons which are more like I like, I love, she said, my father said, then there is a little bit of a if there, and then one has to dig deeper if possible. And the problem, as I said, is always this is time consuming, but hopefully worth it in the end. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, as you mentioned, it's not just our health, which is enough reason to do this kind of investment, but it's also the health of the planet and animals and environment and the effect on climate change. And I mean, it's huge.
Exactly.
And I feel like there's a lot of different aspects that you can look at in terms of your effect on other humans and your effect on the planet. And diet is one of the main ones. It's one of the ones that has the biggest impact, especially with things like climate change. So I think it is important to invest that time if you can. I mean, look, we need to acknowledge that there are folks who live in food deserts or who live in poverty or who work 3 jobs as a single parent and just don't have the mental space. Like, it's important to acknowledge that it's a privilege to be able to do this kind of work and to have time for it and to make decisions around what we're going to buy at the grocery store.
Yes.
But folks who are listening to this podcast, for the most part, I'm pretty sure fit into the population of folks who can make their own food decisions and who have time, at least to some extent, to do research. And it doesn't have to happen all at once. I mean, you don't have to sit there for 7 hours straight and do food research. You can just do it in little chunks.
Absolutely.
But I think it's important to keep in mind. Absolutely. So you had a point in our intake form, just kind of topics that we wanted to discuss today around why diet and lifestyle choices are not binary. And maybe there are some aspects here that will have more or less impact. But what do you mean by that?
When we were chatting last time, I think we kind of almost touched this topic but didn't go into detail. So, my thought process was that whenever I talk with people, we always have this kind of a box discussion, right? Like, I'm vegan, I'm vegetarian, I'm pescatarian, I eat meat, I eat chicken, I don't know, or everything in the gradient basically. And then there's always the discussion of I eat red meat, I don't eat red meat, blah, blah, blah. So, I feel like people, we have this notion of like, we have, of course, we have smartly found terms, but then we want to box ourselves into these terms. And originally, to my knowledge, this whole plant-based revolution a few years back was about changing someone to become plant-based, like converting people to eat vegan food, which of course probably has its advantages and so on. But if you think with like statistics in mind, you're better off trying to make people eat more vegan food per week than convert most or all people to vegan entirely. So that's what I meant about the binary choice. So it's not about vegan or non-vegan, it's more about like how many, let's say, meals per week do you eat that is more plant-based. This was kind of in the direction of what I was referring to in that comment. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, yeah. When we chatted first, which was just a quick Zoom call after I saw your LinkedIn profile, and I'm like, dang, this is an interesting person. We were talking about how, like, of course, as vegans, naturally we want the whole world to go vegan. I mean, that's pretty much a given, if we were to wave a magic wand. But realistically, what will have the most impact on the animals, on the environment, on other humans is if at a population level, humans eat more plant-based food and less animal food. And so I see what you're saying now. The binary thing is like, you don't necessarily have to freak people out and say, you need to go 100% vegan immediately or else, or it's not going to work, right?
Exactly.
So I think that's an important point to keep in mind. At the same time, we can hold the idealistic, don't we just want the whole world to go vegan?
Absolutely. I think one of the downsides of our time is this whole like industrialization of food. Like I feel like probably to my knowledge, at least from what I've read, 40, 50 years back, the amount of meat consumed by an average person was far lesser than what it is right now, because we simply have more access. You just walk into the supermarket, you can buy whatever you want for all week. Probably this binary question wouldn't, it's come up through time, I feel. And in some sense, like, there was this whole we are just eating meat because we have access to meat, and then there was this era where you just like have access to meat anytime, and then in between people realized that, oh, okay, people are consuming too much meat, so we need to go plant based. And then the plant based revolution took its old hype that everyone should eat plant based. But I think the answer is somewhere in between. Like, if you are eating meat, I don't know, once every so often, it really shouldn't matter. Of course, as you said, the ideal picture is that it doesn't happen. But in reality, if we could even reduce it, by 20-30%, it's already going to help the environment a lot more than it is right now. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of food brands these days realize this. And of course, I mean, at this point, it seems like just bad business to not have plant based options in a restaurant or in your line of products. But I think a lot of businesses are catching on to this idea. I just this morning on Instagram saw a post that the Daya, I don't actually know how to say the company, but the vegan cheese company put out an ad with beef burgers shown on the barbecue with the non-dairy cheese on top. And the whole idea of the ad was like, hey, you don't have to be vegan to use our product. And of course, a lot of vegans are pushing back at this, which I completely understand. But the point is, I think even large corporations are catching on to this idea that maybe not everyone buying their products is vegan. And probably most people aren't. We had the CEO of a vegan burger chain on the show a while back, and he said the vast majority of his customers are not vegan. They are eating at his place as an alternative for the animal-based burger they would have had normally. So this kind of thing with options available and with marketing, I think is in line with this idea that it doesn't have to be binary. It can. I mean, we're both vegan. I'm not going around telling people I'm like flexitarian or something. I'm firmly in the vegan box, but not everyone has to be in order to see a difference, I think is the point.
That is true. I think all these like meat replacements are truly helping this process, in my opinion. So it's good that they have these kind of options around, and people are interested in buying and trying it. And, we are seeing that kind of change. At least it looks like to me that the taste box gets ticked. So that's a good thing, right? Because that's one feedback that mostly comes out, that, let's say, the plant based food is not as tasty as, let's say, meat or something. And these meat replacements really fill that void in between. And like you said, like the whole binary picture gets like broken down a bit, and more people are interested in trying vegan food. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in 2003, which is when I went vegan, you had like a bean burger as your only option. Probably not even in restaurants. I mean, you'd have to go to the grocery store and buy them frozen, and it's just like congealed beans at that point, which is fine. But nowadays, you really have no excuse. I mean, you can get the same texture and flavor and meat experience if that's what you want. I mean, a lot of folks don't want that, and that's fine. But I mean, I've said it multiple times on the show. I didn't go vegan because I didn't like how meat tastes. I just didn't like where it came from. So I'm happy to have all these options. I think they're great. They're a plant-based source of these textures and flavors that aren't killing animals, which works for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, uh, in my opinion, the one hurdle, let's say, that still is up ahead is all of these like plant-based food. It's still, as you mentioned, privilege. Unfortunately, like
Yes,
it's
that's true.
yes.
Very true.
And more of these replacements are also a privilege, because you have an additional, I don't know, a few euros or dollars that you have to pay on top just to get the meat replacement version. So
Oh, 100%.
exactly. Hopefully, in the near future, like, more people start consuming these things, so that the price of each of these, like, vegan products goes down. That's like one more cool thing that could happen to like ensure more people are interested in products like these. Yeah.
Hmm. I think that's a great point. I think it's important to keep in mind that veganism doesn't have to be more expensive. I mean, you could live on beans and rice for next to nothing. But all of these more specialty products, yes, unfortunately, they usually are more. There's a chain here in Canada of fast food called A&W, and they have, I don't actually know what their normal burgers cost, probably $6 or something. But the Beyond burger is $13. Like just for, I get it sometimes in like a lettuce wrap with a little side of fries, and it's $13. It's like more than twice the price probably of what it would cost if it wasn't a Beyond Burger.
That's crazy.
And so for folks who are going to these types of places on a regular basis, who are looking for a deal, that's probably not even an option for them. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. So I think it's an important thing to keep in mind.
Exactly. I find it super ironic because, I mean, we discussed this shortly also before, Karina, but you would know like 30% of India is vegetarian, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
lot of food there is plant based. Of course, you'd have milk and curd and cheese here and there, but you can easily get around as a vegetarian. And typically, the vegetarian options there are cheaper than the chicken or the meat options. And then it was a little bit of a interesting thing for me to notice when I came here and generally in the West that the plant-based options are priced more than the meat options. So I think at the end of the day, I personally think that it's about the number of people that consume that kind of diet, so to say. And once you have more people interested in these kind of things, I hope the $13 go down to like $5. Yeah.
That would be the ideal, or just on par with whatever the quote unquote regular burgers cost.
Regular burgers, yeah. That's true.
Not
Yes.
actually regular, but you know what I mean. The dead
Yeah,
animal
yeah.
burgers.
Yeah.
Okay, so with all of this information out there, so let's say someone has gone through a bit of the process of looking at the research, asking the people, looking at the papers, doing a bit of introspection, they're going to come across a shit ton of conflicting information on the internet.
I agree.
It's just everywhere. And so, actually, when we have new folks coming into our fitness and nutrition coaching, very often it's because they feel overloaded by too much information. Like, oh my God, I have no idea where to start because I've heard 14 different things and they all conflict with each other. What the hell do I need to do?
Yes.
So, in terms of diet and lifestyle decisions, choosing what's best for us, the fact is there's a bunch of conflicting information out there. How do we work with that? How do we deal with conflicting information, conflicting opinions, and make a decision from there?
Yep, this is always the challenging question. I mean, once I was talking with a friend of mine who was talking about his friend being confused about whether to become vegan or not, and I was like, "Hey, the evidence is out there. You just have to see it, and then you will know." I mean, we can all agree that if you eat meat, the carbon footprint is higher. There is no doubt about that because I don't know, you consume chicken, chicken eats some kind of a fodder, but then like it goes through the life cycle and then you have to kill it and then you have to convert it into something that you can consume. Whereas if you directly consume, I don't know, soy or tofu, it's going to be like a lot cheaper and a lot less stressful on the environment, so it makes a logical argument. And I was telling him that, he was like, what you don't understand is that they can read 10 papers but they would not have the kind of like background to sift through information, leave away the frill stuff and take the actual summary out. And I feel in the end, there you just have to go to a trusted person, whoever it is. If there is someone in your family who is, let's say, has a background in like going through papers, or has a expertise in the area, or friends who have expertise in the area, I guess most of them I would recommend, and they would end up going to these people for advice and then take their advice as the final word. But whether that's the best decision in terms of whether they would become vegan or not is never guaranteed, right? Because it depends who you go to. That's why we initially discussed the idea of like they should go to 10 people or something. But then you mentioned that if they go to 10 people, they would be super confused in the end.
Well, yeah, likely.
The problem here is like trusting the ground truth, right? The ground truth is like clear when you actually do the math, particularly environment wise. Ethics wise, there is no question. And in terms of health, yes, typically there is no question, but then the people can come up with counter arguments. So a long story short, I would say you need to find a trusted person, or be able to draw a judgment on your own, or with the help of, for example, nutritionists or sports people such as you, Karina. This is the only thing. If that means that they end up going to a person who propagates them to eat meat, well, that is truly a consequence that we need to be aware of, and it's possible. Yes, that's the truth.
Oh, it happens. There are people with PhDs who are touting the carnivore diet and all sorts of ridiculous stuff. So it does happen. I think in an ideal world, we would be going to larger scale organizations or databases rather than individual people. But the truth is, we all have trusted folks that we go to. Someone for me that comes to mind, shout out to Dr. Matt Nagra, who was on the show. He has one of the best Instagram feeds on sifting through bullshit and what studies mean and how big the effect was and what did they find and who did they study. And I think one of the main reasons I follow his work is because okay, he's vegan, yes, but he is looking at the research objectively. He'll tell you what's wrong with this study that found A, B, and C is great about veganism. So if you find someone who can be objective and set aside their own biases, I'll call it, even though it's technically research based, I think that's a sign that you found someone who knows what they're doing. And there's a lot of folks in veganism I find who have this gut reaction of you're doing veganism wrong if you criticize it at all. So if you criticize a study that found veganism is better for you than eating meat, if you criticize one of the many documentaries out there now, which I've done a lot, by the way, because documentaries are not legitimate science. Anyways, there's a portion of the vegan population who is basically like, vegan is great at all costs. And I think that actually is doing veganism a disservice, because people who know how to think critically and who know how to look at research are just going to discount veganism based on these people who have really no clue how to do critical thinking. And I think it's important that we base our decisions on actual science and we get people interested in the movement from a point of legitimate peer-reviewed data and not like a documentary that's inherently biased. Even though it might get people thinking about veganism, it's generally not a legit source of data, which is one of many problems I have with documentaries. Even though we see a lot of people who watch something like The Game Changers and they're like, oh my God, I have to go vegan. And they go vegan overnight, which is great.
Yeah. And then give up the next day.
Perhaps, that's right,
I guess.
Exactly. See, this is the problem. Then they realize, oh, wait a second. That's exactly it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I think adding to the point that you mentioned, a lot of our approach is self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Sometimes we don't
Yes.
ask the question, am I eating the right diet? But it's more like, oh, I'm eating, I don't know, XYZ. I'm not going to take any sides here. And then go to the guy that propagates XYZ and then take his opinion. And that's very likely going to, conform to the assumption that you go in with already. So, in other words, if you are vegan, go question like why you're not eating meat. It's a legit question to ask. And if you're eating meat, it's good to ask why I'm not going vegan. And then maybe at some point, people will converge to the fact that overall, being vegan is actually better for the environment.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is an interesting point, because one of the things I think folks should do more when they're quote unquote researching on Google is looking at the opposite viewpoint. So usually what we're doing in an argument, or, if I were to poke some trolls for shits and giggles on Reddit, we're usually Googling something like, why is veganism healthier than eating meat?
Exactly.
Or why is veganism better for athletes than being omnivorous? Versus taking veganism out of the question or out of the equation and saying, what is the best diet for athletic performance? What is the healthiest diet? Or even looking at the opposite, like, why would an omnivorous diet have benefits for A, B, and C? So a lot of times we're not actually looking for the other so-called side, when that might actually help us in a lot of discussions, I would think.
Absolutely. That's a very, very good way to put it. Yes. So just to like explore all of the option space, but like we discussed before, the main downside of this approach, it costs time. So
Yes,
if people
right.
can just like you said, every other day, question their assumptions about diet, this would still be better than not questioning it at all. And in the end, like we said, we are not really targeting a binary world in terms of diet. We are trying to converge somewhere in between for now, and hopefully in the future generation it gets better than what how it is today. Yeah.
Well said. Yes. Well, Jeyashree, what's next for you? Do you have a race on the horizon? What are some projects that are happening for you at this point?
Yes, so the main thing I'm super looking forward to is a marathon that's coming up in April. So I'm training for that one now. And then, if all goes well, I'll run one more towards the end of the year. And alongside, just a few months back, I started doing some bodybuilding workouts as well. So, because I was truly focusing only on cardio before that, now I'm doing doing a little bit more. So cardio as in only running and swimming, but now I'm also doing a little bit more of muscle building.
Good for you.
And I'm
I like to hear it.
Thanks, Karina. Hoping that at some point I converge to now the new lingo called hybrid athlete. I'm looking up and learning about it. I still don't know about the concepts fully yet, but I like the sound of it, and maybe I'll just try it out this year and see where it takes me. Yeah.
That's exciting. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of folks who have main sports, and that is perfectly fine. Runners, swimmers, long distance athletes of various types, cyclists, and they don't do strength training, which makes sense in a way because it's very time consuming to do endurance sports, and there's only so many hours in the day. But you're at higher risk of injury if you don't strength train, and you're actually going to improve your performance at said sports with strength training. You're going to bulletproof yourself, you're not going to get injured, and you'll perform better. So I think the idea of hybrid is right on track because we don't get stronger by running, we don't get stronger by swimming, we get stronger by lifting heavy shit, which then helps
Right.
the swimming and the running or anything else that we're doing. So I think that's fantastic.
Thanks, Karina.
I might be a little biased because this is what we do, but yay for doing strength training.
Thanks, Karina. Yeah, keep my fingers crossed. Yeah.
Of course. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show and speaking with me, Jeyashree. It was a great conversation.
Yes, thanks a lot for having me, Karina. I'm super excited that we could, finally get going on this one. Yeah.
Jeyashree, thanks again for joining me on the podcast. Access our show notes at nobullshitvegan.com/173 to connect with Jeyashree. And don't forget to download your free copy of the No BS Vegan ebook at nobullshitvegan.com/ebook. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to the No Bullshit Vegan podcast at nobullshitvegan.com.